Fun times. I think we can roll the other presentation called Losing My Privilege. So basically, it's I'm going to share my personal story in the corporate world, what the transition felt like, how along the way I met people in situations that actually hindered my development, and then people in situations that actually helped my development. And then from that point on, once we've covered that basics, we'll actually go into tips, things that you might, frameworks, things that you might want to use in your day-to-day life as you're working in the diversity and inclusion space. So I'm not a specialist by any means. I do work, part of my job, about 15-20% of my job is something called VP of Creative, of Inclusive Creativity. Essentially, I try to see how we can be more inclusive in the advertising products we create. So that can be anything from making sure that our websites are inclusive, for people who can't see or whatever, but it's also making sure the representation is right when we actually do ads. And we'll talk a lot about getting representation right as well in the talk. So I'm going to start with a bit of a disclaimer. When I say losing my privilege, it feels as if I was saying that I have no privilege. Obviously, I do. The main one is being white, and we know obviously that I know my trans sisters of colors have a much harder time than I do. Also, my career benefited from the fact that I hid for a very long time. So for the longest period of my life, around, the first 15, 20 years of my career, I actually lived as a man. And so I benefited from that, right? So that got me into positions of leadership that other women in my team weren't getting, right? So I understand the privilege that I enjoy. So if I compare myself as well to how people in my community live, I'm also quite lucky, right? The vast majority of us have experienced some sort of violent act, and that can be through words, that can be through insults, that can be through nasty messages on social media. There are more and more of those. It can also be physical violence in many cases, right? And I don't know if it's because I'm 6'3" in heels, but anybody that's attempted physical violence on me has backed away. So I'm suppose that I am lucky from that. Half of us do experience some form of depression, not because being trans is inherently difficult. It has issues. There are challenges, obviously, that come with it. With for those people that actually go through medical transition, obviously, there's a lot of health issues but it's not that. That's not what makes us depressed. What makes us depressed is not necessarily the gender dysphoria. It's the pressure from the outside world. That's the main cause. It's the looks. It's people judging. It's people who don't necessarily understand what we are going through, and that leads to the third number, which is that odds are that it's difficult for trans people to find a job because, I don't know, maybe employers feel a little bit threatened, or they don't know how to deal with a trans person. Perhaps they see them as a problematic or problem in waiting. And so it's really hard for trans people to establish themselves as professionals, to establish themselves in the workspace beyond the typical things like working at Sephora, right? And it's quite sad. So we're going to talk about my story. And by the way, you can stop me anytime you want. This is a small group, so it's usually I give this sort of big keynote, and I expect silence. But here, obviously, we're a little gang. So raise your hand, and if you want to take a picture of a slide, just tell me. Can I go back? And So transition. Oh yes, go ahead. Chris Bergeron on Instagram is if you want to tag me. Yeah, Bergeron, like the hockey player, like Tom Bergeron from what, The Price is Right or something, or Jeopardy. Dancing with the Stars. Okay, so transition is different for different people, obviously. So we're just going to talk about my story. It's not a template. You may know trans people in your lives that have done things a bit differently. If I was to think about, the dominant emotion in my early transition or my attempts at transition, it was fear, right? I transitioned socially, let's say, clumsily at around the age of 30, 35, right? I tried at many ages. I tried to tell my mom when I was a kid. I tried to tell her again, my parents, when I was a teenager. And then in college, I started, dressing a little bit artistically, let's say, but it was college, so nobody would notice. And then so every time I pushed towards androgyny or I pushed towards a more feminine style, I would back out. And the reason I would back out from those little efforts, those little moments of freedom, is because I was afraid of essentially losing everything that this guy was working for. And this was me back in the day. You called me he in the introduction. This was the he. This was the he, him. And so, this is me trying to fit in as the editor of Voir, which was very much like Exclaim or Now or those types of publications, the Village Voice. So that was the equivalent for Quebec, and it was a network of 8 papers, 500,000 readers every week, 3 television shows, and I chief editor of that network at the age of 30. And it's a bit of a cliche, but journalism is at the time was a men's world, at least when it came to being a chief editor. Sadly, women were chief editors of fashion magazines and or sometimes certain news networks, but that was very, very rare. And so I tried to fit in. I tried to look like the people that came before me. There were 4 editors before me in the history of the paper. I knew what they looked like. I knew who they were, and I tried to model myself onto them. And basically that meant being a bad boss, being a jerk, and trying to play a role that just wasn't who I was, right? And so the fear is what kept me there in that identity, right? And this is an excerpt from my book. I happen to be a novelist. I happen to be an award-winning novelist, and this is something I wrote to explain the connection that you feel with your body when you're living in this sort of, I guess, secret dysphoria, right? So maybe I can read that for you. I'm angry at my body for having served me so poorly. It's been the too imperfect home of myself. I would have liked to move, but my lease is for life. Yukio Mishima is right. The body is not our home. Our home is the self. And in this case, the body is the orchard that surrounds this home. We're free to cultivate it or to leave it follow. I haven't cultivated my orchard, my garden, my imperfect metaphor. For a long time, I was angry at my body, but maybe my body should be the one resenting me. Untended gardens should have the right to blame deleterious gardeners. I didn't protect mine from the elements. I've deprived it of sun. I've deprived it of heat. I've also deprived it of water and the steel of my will. If my body is an orchard, maybe I'm the weed, and to think I could have been a flower. And this is another part of my book that sets place in a future state where trans people are not allowed to exist. And this is something that my character, who went back into the closet, says to one of her, I guess, captors. Sometimes I sit downstairs in the little courtyard of the building. I sit motionless on my bench, my eyes wide open, looking around. To see is to be. When a woman walks back, I observe her with all my might. I become a plant. My eyes become leaves. I turn them towards the hot star that brushes me with its elliptical orbit. I let its energy feed all my membranes, all my cells. When I feel tiny bursts of joy begin to mingle with my persistent sadness, I know that I've been filled up with sap. I'm still alive. In the garden of women, I survive by photosynthesis. Thank you. So during those days and years of exploration, as I was trying to stretch the elastic of my identity and trying to see what was acceptable and what wasn't, I realized that gender was a negotiation, right? So as I was saying, when I was the editor of that paper, I was beginning to grow my hair long a little bit, and I started wearing, a little bit of makeup, and my heels started getting a bit of a, my shoes started getting a bit of a heel, and so, but I was still kind of androgynous, and so really my colleagues thought that I was just being very poetic and French. I live in Quebec, so they just thought I was like, bonjour, right? But that wasn't what was happening at all. And so, I remember this one time I was waiting for the elevator, and the owners of the paper just came across and looked at me up and down as we were entering the elevator. And I knew at that moment that I was being kicked out of the boys' club. And really, as I was expressing my femininity more, I realized that, I was less invited in important meetings, less consulted, and all of a sudden my yearly evaluations were a little bit tougher, right? And eventually they fired me, kind of overnight. Yeah, whoa! They fired me overnight, and they fired me without any real explanation except that I was bad for morale, right? So I'm not saying that they're transphobic because I don't have a lawyer, but I also can thanks, but I also I think what it was is I didn't fit their image of what a leader is. That was the core issue, right? And they replaced me with somebody who looked like what I looked like before, with the little beard, with the little hair, with the little suit and the right attitude, which was exactly the attitude they were looking for. Not more competent, not necessarily a better editor, just that, just fitting the bill a little bit more, right? I was lucky in a sense to be fired because I got to explore a little bit more. I understood that I had to change my job because I tried looking around in journalism, and all the papers closed their doors at me. There was no way they would hire me because of how I looked, right? And because they would think that as a representation of the paper, my appearance would be some kind of provocation, right? And so you want to be as sort of transparent as possible when you're a reporter. And so in that case, probably that was an issue. And I also tried to go into women's magazine, but then the women were telling me, yeah, but you're not a real woman, so we're gonna, the jobs are gonna go to the real women. So really there was no place to go. So I went into this the great cesspool of failed artists and journalists, which is advertising. Not that I inherently or really wanted to make McDonald's ads, like that wasn't my life, ambition, but yet there I was. Why did I go into advertising? And this is a product placement, by the way. Has been a client once or twice actually, but why did I go into advertising? Because I had visited an agency, and I saw that people were sort of skateboarding in the halls, and they wore hats, and they were tattooed, and they had that whole thing, right? And I thought, oh, this is a place where ideas are more important maybe than what you look like. And really I did experience some of that. I did realize after that, of course, I was trading one uniform for another uniform. In advertising, you have to have a certain look, you have to, so it's not like it was a perfect thing. But there were days where I was allowed to be myself. Sadly, there were also days when some of my accounts leads would say, oh, but for this client, you have to dress like a man. For that client, they're cool. Right? But that client, they're American, they're corporate, not sure. To the point where once I was invited to attend a cocktail party in Basel in Switzerland for Tag Heuer, which was a client of mine that I had helped to win. And so I went there and I dressed as one does when you're invited at a party where Gwyneth Paltrow is. So you kind of wear, I wore my Louboutins. Oh, it was Cameron Diaz, sorry. I wore my Louboutins and I wore a pretty dress. And a couple of days after that, we got a call at our Paris office saying, you will fire that. It is worse than a gay, or you will lose the account. Yeah, right? This was 2013, right? This is from a company, by the way, LVMH. Again, I have to highlight the fact that I don't have a lawyer. So if there's anybody from LVMH, please, we can talk after. But you know, this was from a company that benefits greatly from the imagination, the work, and the creativity of queer people, right? Maybe not Tag Heuer directly, but certainly the holding, the group. And so I was really surprised to hear that. Very, very, very surprised. So what I found is that, in fact, gender is a negotiation. And who sets up the terms of the contracts negotiated when it comes to, you know, my public self at those times was straight white men. They're the ones that told me what I could be, where I could be myself, you know, when, for how long, and what the cost of my difference, the price of my difference was, right? And so that place that I had loved, this first agency, and I thought, oh my God, I went from the best job in Montreal, which is running its cultural weekly, to the best job in Montreal, which is being a creative director in the top agency in the city, working for great brands. So it was really tattooed in my heart, right? It was kind of my rebound job in a way after 10 years at the paper. And then they fired me overnight, a couple of months after the Tag Heuer incident. You know, again, this was after building a department from scratch, you know, from $0 to $2 million a year, from 0 people to 15 people, you know, like not small achievements, winning a bunch of awards. And I knew people that were less competent that kept their jobs. So again, they didn't know what to do with a trans person, right? That was the issue. There was this one time where, for instance, they asked me not to come to the women's washroom. You know, I would wear dresses very often, and I was like not very comfortable to go to the men's washroom, obviously, right? And they said, no, you can only go to the women's bathroom when you start doing your medical transition. So when you're on hormones and when, you know, which today would be unthinkable because the social transition aspect of transition is as important as the medical, and some people don't even do a medical transition, and you can't impose medical transition on people for all sorts of reasons, including obviously health reasons, right? And so that was the general layout of my early transition, right? Very clumsy, very hard, guided by fear. And yet, once I was fired, again, every time I lost my job, I thought, this is another sign to be myself. So it wasn't like, oh no, I paid the price or too great a price. I thought, you know what, I've got a good experience. I ran papers that people knew, and then I've done good work at the agency I was, and so now I can be a freelancer and be myself. And the people that come to me as a freelancer, at least they'll know what they get, right? So that's what I did for a while. It was enough for me to start building the courage to live 100% of the time as a woman and actually change my pronouns and do all of that. And even start, you know, sort of seeing a psychologist and doing the work that comes with that, right? And I think it's really important when you say the words, I am trans, to yourself, right? Where you actually allow yourself to say, this is what I am. It's not about a tag. It's not about locking yourself in an identity. It's about claiming ownership of your life, right? Again, in my book, I wrote this little thing about it. So here it goes. I'm trans, as in transgression. I've broken the genders. I've evaded the codes. I've forgotten the orders of men. I'm trans, as in translation. I've shifted the elements that constitute my person from one state to another. My geometry has been variable. I'm trans as in transmutation. My life is alchemy. I've turned lead into gold. I know the formula the magician's assistant whispers when, after being cut in two, she is reconstituted to the sound of applause. I'm trans as in transported by love. I've known all the fervors, those of men, those of women, and those in between who chose to leave the binaries ball. I'm trans as in transfixed by fear, by love, by solitude. I'm trans as in transhumans. I changed flocks and pastured. I was a ram. I tried to be a ewe, but it was in vain. I understand now that I am a she-wolf because I'm trans as in transgender. And tonight, I'm a revolution. So when you say those words to yourself, and you go through the process and, you know, all the hoops, the medical hoops and whatever, and you get to the point where they give you the actual hormones and you start taking the estrogen and whatever, you have to sign a little contract with society, right? It's actually a disclaimer from the medical field. Basically, there's a list of the side effects that you get from hormones. All the ladies here know them. If you've taken the pill or done HRT, you know, you can get a blood clot, you can breast cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So that I knew. I mean, that's the... What was surprising is that at the end of the list of commonly known side effects, there were the social side effects. It said you may have issues with your family, they may disown you, or you may have a hard time in the street, or you may lose your job or have a hard time finding your job, or you may experience violence. This was the government saying these things. And it was almost as if the government was saying, you know what, you're on your own, right? It's like tough luck, essentially, was the message. And so I understand that I was signing my privilege away at that moment, right? And what should have felt like perhaps a joyous moment where, oh my God, it's happening, right? I was expecting balloons or something, congratulations. But no, what you get from the medical field is, okay, you're going on one hell of a journey, you know, good luck to you. I actually had doctors say like, oh, like this, like, good luck, right? So I mean, obviously things are changing because I started taking hormones maybe 8 years ago or something, but still, I mean, it's a very harrowing experience. And obviously what happens then is well, you feel like you're slipping into the matrix when you start transitioning and your body changes and the way people look at you changes, right? It's as if I was seeing the real face of the world. In fact, The Matrix, by the way, was written by two trans women, so it is part of it is an allegory of the trans experience. You know, at least there is some of that in the subtext of the movie. But really, you know, you take those pills. The red pill, by the way, it was the reason they had the red and the blue pills is that they're actually pills that are hormones, and that was the color of the estrogen pill in those days when they were doing the movie. So they actually referred it quite openly, and really you get a feeling that the world is not what you expected. You know, having lived the experience of a man. I understood that there was violence, and I understood that the world was rougher for women, but you know, you have to experience it. The fear in the street at night, you know, the always checking out, you know, over your shoulder, the uncertainty. When you're a man, the world belongs to you. It really does. The city belongs to you. You just walk, and it's yours, and you go to your meetings, and it's you know, we talk about frictionless experiences in marketing. Like being a man is a frictionless consumer experience, and being a woman is like super frictiony. It's like nothing works, and it's a shame, right? And obviously, there was this sort of double misogyny with me because you know, I got what women live to on the everyday basis, which is you're not necessarily the first to speak in a meeting anymore, and blah blah blah, right? But then also the fact that I was trans meant that, you know, some people would see just my appearance as a provocation, just like the people at Tag Heuer, right? So the feeling when that happens is that you start drifting away. Obviously, from, you know, you're kind of floating away on your little iceberg like this cute little penguin, and it's hard not to just be this little guy that just, you know, want to be alone, right? Wants to be alone, wants to live their own life far away from society. And I know a lot of trans people that are like that just, you know, move away from the city, or just to avoid the looks, to avoid the pressure. And so I, you know, when I do these talks, for instance, or when I write books, or when I go to work, really, it's about not being this. It's about remaining connected, right? And that's the power of inclusion at work, is that you remain a strong connector for people who may feel that they are disconnecting because society is putting so much pressure on them, right, by judging them. And in fact, I think anybody that's part of a marginalized group will understand this little formula, right? We all walk around with the memory of the bad things that happened to us, right? The trauma. Comments, the people that weren't there for us, the people that backstabbed us, the people that you thought were good but then ended up being hateful, all of that, right? You carry that with you. You don't think about it all the time, but it's there. It's sitting in the back of your mind, right? That leads to hypervigilance, right? Is this a safe place? What are the signals that it's a safe place, right? Like if I enter a space like this, I would look at the washrooms. I would look at, do y'all have, pronoun tags or something? You don't. So is this a safe place? I don't know. The signals aren't there, right? So that creates hypervigilance, sorry. And that connects to cynicism, right? Because when a company then, when Pride season comes along, replace Pride season by any celebration of any marginalized group, and I think it's the same feeling we all have. And you're like, okay, you're for us this month, good, but really, what do you do, right? What do you do to lift these barriers? And that's the real important question, right? Because in society, there's three ways that I experience the world. Either this, there's no ads, no services, nothing for me, totally ignored. Or that, I get looked up and down by some angry man, who I get that look a couple of times a day. Or the worst would be this, right? These are real comments that I've gotten in real life. Trans lives don't matter, you lost. Monkey, somebody, I was walking down the street, somebody spat in my face and called me a monkey. The worst one is up there in French. Marc Lépine a révisé sa liste. Marc Lépine is the person who did the Polytechnique murders. And I was featured in a book about women in business. And so when the book came out, this was the thing. We know your face. I was doing a conference and the video was leaked on YouTube. And somebody commented that. We know your face, right? So we know where you work. We know who you are. We're going to get you. We're going to kill you. That's the message. That's what's happening online right now. Which, by the way, is why in my contracts I negotiate when there's cameras. But we'll talk about that later. And then the final thing is this. Can token come out to play? I get tokenized a lot, right? A lot of people, companies and what have you, have me come forward and say things and whatever, and it's great and it's wonderful. But often it's a great burden, right? Because if you're one of the few people of a certain community that is willing to express themselves and willing to give these talks all the time, it's not true that it's the case for every person in the community. And yet we expect that of people for the community to explain to others all the time what's the best way to grow. So that was the downer part of the talk. How are we for time, by the way? How much time do I have? 25 minutes? Okay. And we're right on time. We're going to have time for questions, too. What keeps me going? Well, I have to say that I was saved by an inclusive culture at work. Now, not perfect, right? We're not, the Nobel Prize of diversity. That's not. But at Cossette, there are enough signals, as I was saying, pointers, little elements, things that were said and done that have helped me forward, helped me, believe that my work is my safe place and perhaps the safest place for me in the world. I think a key moment was this. This beautiful woman you see is the CEO of Cossette. Her name is Melanie Dunn. And we were waiting one afternoon for a Uber that was going to take us to a pitch. An advertising pitches are huge shows where we deploy everything we know about, the potential client's industry and everything we've done in the past, and perhaps we even come in with new creative, and so it's a big hoopla. But the person that we were pitching had known me before as a man, a flamboyant man, a man who was a little weird, poetic, as I said before, but still a man, right? And so I asked her, how are you going to present me, right? I hadn't taken hormones yet. I was still in my social transition phase, how are you going to present me? And she just looked at me and just said, you're a woman. That's what I see. That's what you are. That's what I'm going to say. And that was it. And that was somebody who represented the system for me, telling me for the first time in my life, first time ever in my entire life, at the age of 39, you are okay. First time ever. Not my parents, not my friends, nobody. This was it. This was the moment. And this was the moment when I decided I can actually go and see a psychologist, and I can go see a doctor, and I can start the hormone treatment and change and finally be myself because of that. The odd thing is that she doesn't even remember saying that. It was just a reflex, which means she's in the right state of mind. It means that she's in the moment, and when it's time to say something inclusive and empowering, she says it. She takes that opportunity. She didn't wait to have a course, a training thing on being trans, whatever. She just said what she saw, what she felt. And that, to me, is a very good sign, reasons to stay. But two, I think you can learn a lot from that attitude, right? Because there are so many training sessions around this issue, right? But I think eventually it is a posture of the heart. It is really something that comes from within that we can all work on actively. So what happens when you're on the receiving end of these sorts of words, powerful words? Well, calm, it was soothing for me. Thankfulness. Again, right? This was the first time somebody was saying that, so I was thankful to her. And a willingness to go the extra mile, to be a model employee. It's maybe a little Pavlovian, I don't know, but I just wanted to be good. I just wanted to be better. I wanted to deserve this incredible window that opened in my life, I mean, perhaps there's something wrong with that in itself, right? Maybe it was the wrong reaction. This was somebody coming from, I guess, a lot of trauma or something, but still, it's important to know that if you, as a business, if you are an inclusive environment, chances are you will reap the benefits of these kinds of emotions, right? So that's where inclusion is good for business, because it's good for morale, it's good for productivity, people get to focus, people get to concentrate, and people are maybe a little bit happier to go to work, right? So in fact, I've gone from this notion of being, always busy fighting. Work is, especially advertising, it's like a match, it's like a boxing match, except if you're part of a minority, then what happens is you're boxing on your way out to the ring, right, on the street, because you're facing all those looks and those and you don't know if you wore the right thing or if you've got the right shade of lipstick. Like, do you look like a clown or do you look like a woman, right? So you're doing all of that and trying to ground yourself, and then you have to get into the ring and be pulling your day's work and be good at it, and etc. And then you have to get and win the match and then get back out of the ring and fight your way back home, right? That was my days before work was a safe space. So I've gone from this to that. Now I'm this insane woman who is just very happy to be at work. I will repeat it. Work is the less stressful part of my life. And my clients are Intact Insurance, McDonald's, the Government of Canada, Amazon. Like, those are stressful companies. When they call, like, those are not, low stakes companies at all. But I don't care. No, let me just reframe that. But they will never threaten my security. They will never threaten my life. They will always respect me. So if they call me and say, what did you do with this ad? Why is my logo like this? No. It's not the end of the world. It's more difficult for me to walk down the street and being stared at. That's more hurtful, right? So because I am in an environment where I know that I am, in fact, protected by the structure I am a part of, I get to receive the stressful aspects of work in a less dramatic way, probably, right? Which builds confidence, and it's the confidence to actually then do the work, to be more inclusive. We did a lot of conversations. I've had a lot of conversations with our HR department, for instance, and as we were looking at changing our group insurance plan for trans people, with things like adopting an insurance leave, a transition leave. So if you get, operations, you actually get a couple of months or weeks off to actually recuperate from the very invasive operations that trans people may have. Making sure that the medications, the hormones, the laser, breast augmentation, all that stuff is covered by our insurance plan. Right? So much so that I had a colleague come in a few weeks ago and she said, I got these boobs because of you, and which, by the way, was the greatest compliment, right? When another trans sister comes into the office and says, oh, I'm here because I heard about that, because it's such a rare thing. And then, other people from other groups started having conversations like that. We found out as we were talking about hormones that, oh my God, many women who are trying to have children, and a lot of people in our 30s, 40s in agencies actually have put their personal life kind of on the back burner, and all of a sudden they end up and they want to have kids, and so they do HRT. And so as we were covering HRT, a lot of women started saying, well, we realized that a huge percentage of our female employees were using HRT and covering it up and not saying it. So not saying that they were super tired, not saying that, they had headaches, not just trying to be a trooper about it, right? So that changed also the way we looked at that, right? So conversations. These are just a few things that we do. We launched an internship recently this summer for Black and Indigenous grads, and we paid particular attention to the quality of their creative book, not whether they already had the experience, but whether they have actual creative talent. And so not putting the pressure of, who's your dad, what school did you go to, and have you interned at this or that agency before? Like just making sure that there's a bit more of understanding of where people can come from, right, and the conditions in which they work. We do a lot of training as well, people coming in, talking about their communities and their history. This is an education piece that the diversity community at Cossette did, which was really impactful. We wanted to do something around microaggressions, which are very common in the advertising world because it's such a free, speaking kind of thing. And so people, sometimes they see nasty things. And as we were meeting, a lot of our, members of our inclusion committee were saying, oh, sometimes people say very nasty things about me. And so we decided to do a photo shoot and have these things written on the people's faces and put that all over the office, right? This one says, oh, you're pretty for a Black girl, which is something she heard in her career, right? So these are volunteers. We didn't force people to do this, so I have to stress this out. These are volunteers, people that said, you know what, I want to change the narrative on this, and I want to own this, and I want to push this. And in fact, because of that, we had a lot of conversation between employees around microaggressions. Instead of, we did do the formal training, but just by watching this poster, talking in our culture, which is advertising, which is a hard-hitting visual. That's how we speak, and so we spoke our own language, which is more important than doing maybe the 1 hour Q&A thing that they're going to get too bored. This was more efficient, right? So we get to do things like that. This one is fun. This is something we're going to restart again in the next couple of weeks. It's the hate supermarket. Basically, we're taking nasty comments and from hateful groups that are posted online, and we turn them into art forms, and we sell them either as NFTs or just in an art gallery, and we call it the hate supermarket. And then we give all the money to local charities. So really turning hate into good in the most direct way possible. So and this spirit of actually making sure that we go out of our way to go get the talent is something that I've experienced myself. So I'm lucky to have a book that has worked very well in Quebec and in France. It's being turned into a movie, and it was translated. It's coming out. Actually, it came out this week in this week in English Canada. So, and in the States, you can pick it up anywhere. Valid. And so the interesting part is that my publisher came to one of my events, one of these conversations. And she said, oh, you have an interesting story. You should write a book. And so we started talking for a long time. You know, it took me a while to actually figure out what it was. And then once we decided what the actual book would be, which is a sci-fi autobiography, like a dystopian autofiction, where I imagine a world where trans people are not allowed to exist anymore, that's run by an evil AI, and I use that as a sort of lever for revolution. Once we had that, she coached me. She understood that I wasn't going to, you know, go call on a publisher, because I thought publishers didn't care about trans stories, right? That I wasn't going to me, the door was closed, and I didn't think it could be open. So she went out of her way to coach me, to find me, to coach me every week, you know, so that I would become a good writer, right? So she took the time, and the benefits of it are great. We did 3 books together, and, you know, I was featured in a movie. This is the major news magazine in France telling me that I'm super smart, like, you know, so it paid off. Yeah, it's being turned into a film. And same thing with Adrien over there, who the mustachioed man here, with ADN Conférencier, same story. You know, his company is trying to bring different speakers that come from various backgrounds, you know, people that have different disabilities and tell their stories, or people that have just, you know, a tougher, more unusual path, and you know, he's turned it into a business, and he goes out and he gets those people, and the result is moments like this. Yeah, there's a candidate right there, and, you know, moments when you get to touch people. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is this: is that, in fact, inclusion is more than just an HR story, right? The thing with the book, the thing with ADN, those are products, right? So it really is a product story. We have to move beyond just talking about inclusion as an inclusive thing, but think about how it can be part of the development of products, right? This is Microsoft for Xbox, the way they developed gear for people with disabilities, because obviously the different, what are they called, controllers are not adapted to everyone, and so there's a sort of modular kit that they built. That's really interesting, because it's turning something that isn't an HR problem, it's an engineering problem, and there's a market of millions of gamers that use this, and you can buy it in a store and make money out of it, you know. And I think it's important to highlight and to stress the commercial aspects of inclusion, right? If you start looking at all the different minority groups that we have in our country, they add up to some pretty big markets, right? And right now in schools, we are taught to ignore them. It's about values, right? Look at Nike. Nike is a great example of it. Obviously, they're not perfect. They're not saints. You know, they're factories, all of that. But when they stick by an athlete, even if that athlete is politicized, they're saying, we agree with his values, and you may scream at me as much as you want. I will still put up a poster with him. And I don't care if you're burning your sneakers down in Oklahoma or what have you, right? I don't have anything against Oklahoma, but, you know, figure of speech. It can be about credibility as well. And I love this example because it's Rihanna, and Rihanna doesn't, you know, she's not the most politically correct speaker. You know, when she speaks, she's just kind of all over the place. And the way she talks about, like, non-binary people or trans people, she kind of says, and the pronoun people, she's a little clueless. But it's totally fine. And the reason it's totally fine is because when you look at her fashion shows, full-on diversity, every kind of expression you can imagine, it's right there. And if you buy their product, again, lingerie for men, like everything, it's so diverse. And she built a fashion empire doing this, right? So again, the credibility, if you've done the work, if your product is there, it doesn't matter what you say. And I think often when we talk about inclusion, we always focus on what are we going to say? We know what's on our social media platform or what have you, right? What's the cause of the month? Instead of saying what programs are we building that benefit a community and that generates a new market for us. Let's see. So I actually was on the I served as a model of sorts, a spokesperson for 2 examples that I think illustrate the approaches often that people take when it comes to diversity work, either a performative approach or a constructive approach. So the performative approach is this. This was a glasses company in Quebec. They used me as a model, and so I had my face all over their stores. But the glasses weren't done for trans people. You would imagine that glasses for trans women would be maybe a little bit bigger in proportions or whatever, and they would do. But no, this was just like. But it was nice because at least, hey, here's a new type of face, right? So that's the performative aspect, right? It's useful because at least it gets people work in the community and at least you get visible. But the interesting aspect, the more deep work, is the constructive approach. This is Desjardins. Desjardins launched a group collective insurance plan for trans people, right? It's a product they sell to companies across the country. That's something else, right? So they hired me as a spokesperson for it, and I was glad to do it because that's innovation. A new market, a national service, right? And they've actually done the work. So that is, and actually that got me into trouble because I make the ads for Intact Insurance, which is their competitors, and so my boss called me and like, what are you doing? And I'm like, sorry man, it's for the cause. And he was like, well, I don't know about that. So essentially, I find that when it comes to the marketing side of inclusion, we are actually leaving cash on the table. And the reason we're leaving cash on the table is because the decision makers often don't come from these minorities and don't think in those terms. They don't come in with the cultural cues and the state of mind to actually say, hey, maybe we should go there, right? Because it's not that difficult, really. I like to apply something that's called the 6R model that we developed. Yes, go ahead. That we developed in a way to think about our advertising campaigns. Are they inclusive or not? So, do they respect the individual? Right? Does our campaign speak to individual humans based on their personal truth? Does it reflect individual experiences and support it? Right? Does it respond and support the community? Yes? You'll receive the presentation, yeah. Is it a sort of realization of your company culture, right? Is this a way of walking the walk? Does it resonate with the culture, with the values, with the beliefs of the culture in question? And obviously, do the people in the ad look like me, right? Speak my language and understand the codes of my culture, And if you apply this in your work, it's actually maybe a good first step to developing some interesting inclusive products. That's something we did, for instance, I worked on with Reitmans. Reitmans a few years ago was almost going bankrupt, right? Number one women's clothes retailer in Canada, going bankrupt, not a good look. And so we thought one of the ways to actually get them out of that, at least image-wise, was to play the inclusion card as much as possible. And so what we did is we started creating these special collections that spoke to different cultural groups. And so we asked ambassadors from different cultures to design products, to develop patterns with the designers, to actually get involved. And then some of the money from the sales would go to the community centers around Canada and causes that are close to our ambassadors. And then we made this huge ad campaign across Canada that said that diversity is the fabric of Canada. And so we were sort of planting a flag. We actually rewrote the national anthem in our spot, right? So it was a way to get maybe a little bit political, but mostly to say, we're here for these markets and we're here for you, right? And the results were quite positive. We got a lot of personal letters from people as we were getting into that road. There's something we did that was really nice for the holidays a few years ago is that we actually decided to celebrating, the act of celebrating, right? Every religion has the same thing. Everybody are at a table with your aunties and your grandparents and eating. And I was like, let's figure that. Let's put that. So we rented a bunch of houses and we asked our models to bring their family and redo their Diwali dinner or their, we went through the whole, all the way down to Chinese New Year's. So we built a whole calendar and we put pictures up and we got letters from people. It's the first time I see my my community and my own version of the holidays in an ad, and you know, that's wonderful, and it's an easy way to make, you know, people happy and really engage with the brand, right? A good example that I love is the MasterCard True Name program. I didn't work on it, but I think it's a wonderful example. It's hard for trans people to sometimes have papers that are in order, right? And so your credit card might have a name that is of your previous gender, you know, identity. And so that can create issues if you're, let's say, at a bar and the barman is a bit of a jerk, or if, you know, pretty much anywhere, you're coming out as soon as you give your card. And so this allows trans people to actually have their true name, their chosen name, on their card before their legal name is changed. So you can call them and say, you know what, on my card, I wanted to say this, you know, and that, again, right, that alleviates friction, makes things easy, because everything is always stressful, right? So a couple of rules. One, it's not about you. Now, I know there's a lot of HR people here, so you know this already, right? When you're building a diversity and inclusion plan, it is not about the company, it is about the people that are part of the communities, and that's what you have to look at. So it has to be a listening tour first. It has to be, you know, you have to take it from a stance of humility. It's super important, instead of trying to have people fit into a culture that you've designed artificially, right? Two, listening is a start. So listening is interpersonal. It's as a colleague, from colleague to colleague, you know, making sure you understand the cues and you look, you know, the people who thought that I was being very poetic weren't looking very hard, you know, listen. But then it can also mean, you know, tell me more. Right? So you can listen actively. You can actually go and ask for information. You can ask help. Help me help you is a nice way to listen as well, right? But it is the first step for sure. And if you see something, say something. And to me, this refers more to the weight that we carry on our shoulders, right? And obviously, there's a lot of pressure at work to perform. But some people carry this extra load, and sometimes that shows. And I think we're oblivious to that often, right? We see people sort of crumble under the weight, and we don't help them, or we don't, you know, give that extra little push. And so that is an important part, I think, of inclusive work. And then we have to support dissonance. I'm very much against the idea of cultural fit. To me, cultural fit is just people hiring themselves, or, you know, and positioning themselves as mentors for whatever, right? If you're in a meeting, especially a creative meeting where people are in disagreements, or they are screaming at each other, well, I'm French, so that's normal, right? But if you know, if the disagreements are interesting and strong, that's when the creativity kicks in. Right? That's when you start having ideas. If everybody agrees all the time on the goals and the direction of the company, then you might go bankrupt, you know? Because you might, you know, everybody happily go into a ditch, right? I think it's important to debate things. So, and then we have a responsibility, a common responsibility. Obviously, diversity is everywhere. It's here in this room. But this is the imperative. And it's the imperative, I think, in the political landscape that we are seeing, right? Right now, people from at least my group and other groups are being targeted politically, socially. It's easy because we're not a lot of people, and so it's easy to sort of like use this as a political scapegoat, spread lies about what we want, and gain some points. Because everybody understands, oh, we're against trans rights because we're for families. But try to explain how lowering the taux d'intérêt, the interest rate, will impact manufacturing, which is what, you know, politicians should talk about. That's complicated, and the voters don't understand that. So then we become scapegoats, right? Because it's easy to hate somebody, and it's more difficult to start thinking about things like the environment and the economy and whatever. And that's why you're seeing these days so much political discourse that is anti-trans, anti-LGBT, and all this common sense talk that we're seeing. Whereas in fact, the common sense that matters is science. And, the science says that there are ways there are protocol for transitions, right? So we have to be careful. We're all responsible for what comes next. 3 books, 2 that are good, 1 that I wrote. So this one, I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya, Toronto local, I think. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book about their experience as a non-binary person, right? And their relationship with the patriarchy, if you will. This is sort of a must-read when, probably you may have this already on your bookshelves, but it's a good reminder of, how to organize a socially responsible company. And my little dystopian autofiction, that's at House of Anansi. And if you go to the House of Anansi website and you type in valid 15, you get 15% off. And that's it. I think now we are at questions. And this quote, I think that I want to leave you with, which is from the wonderful Janet Mock, who's a producer, author, writer. She does everything. We are familiar with fear, and I yearn for us to become intimate with creating and living and loving. That's the goal. Any questions, comments? I have a comment. Yeah. Oh, thank you. And I want to thank you for this. But my company works in inclusion, diversity,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We were called into Walmart
Yeah.
once because there was a man transitioning into a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in their distribution area,
Mm-hmm.
and she was just beginning the transition,
Yeah.
and she was being mocked
Yeah.
and bullied
Yeah.
and everything, and it was, we finally had to move her out
Yeah.
for her own safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was a distribution center, they didn't get her.
Yeah. It's funny because very often, it's diversity inclusion training, as you know, is done often, mid-range employees and up all the way to, decision when it's done. But never the people on the ground, never rarely the people behind the counter, never the people in the warehouses. Why? Because those people rotate a lot and they're considered as disposable, and so they don't invest in them, which is a real shame because that's where the hurt is most of the time. You're right? And that's when you need cultural mediation often, right? Because you have to understand that our values may be very strange to somebody who just landed, right? And that's their first contact with Canada and Canadian culture and our acceptance of LGBTQ issues. And that too is part of it, right? And there's no cultural mediation, and there's nobody in there outside of people like you who are doing this work. And often, as you say, I imagine that the answer is just putting people out of the environment instead of fixing it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because we were working with them, but when we left, they went right back to what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really didn't matter. It was like talking to brick walls.
Yeah.
Brick walls better than
Yeah.
talking to them. It was so difficult. And but she was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And she was accepted, said, you know what, this isn't the best place for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And she was moved into another area in Walmart. It's not like she lost a job.
No.
She was moved into a better, kinder environment.
Yeah. I think Walmart also is a good example because they
I don't know about that.
have no, but they seem to have sort of a logistical knack sometimes to fix these things or actually identify them or you know, I like, for instance, that they have a page that helps people get their papers for immigration. You know, I mean, it's you know, to me that's lifting a barrier. They kind of facilitate things, but I mean, yeah. But again, they may be good at one side of the equation and not the other, right? And maybe not. Anyways, let's not get into the details. But no company has the full picture down, sadly, right? No. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's uphill battle. Well, thank you for your comment. Any other questions? Yes, maybe takeaways from the conference.
First of all, thank you very much for being here
Thank you.
and for being vulnerable and sharing your lived experiences. I'm a member of queer community,
Mm-hmm.
and just hearing from you directly has been just inspirational and empowering at the same time. So I'm wondering, like you've done a lot, movie, book, and then like the modeling
Burnout.
burnout for sure.
I've done that too.
Just me being curious about the next chapter, like what's on the docket, like
Oh.
what do you want to achieve? What
Well, my third book in French comes out next week, and my first book, the translation just came out this week in English. So you know that's my focus on the creative side, and then you know it's funny. I am less goal oriented as much as I am experience oriented these days, and I think you know I look at Adrienne over here, and it's like I want to do more of those. I want to reach out more to people and talk more to people and have those kinds of reactions and make sure that then they come home with one or two sentences that they can maybe you know apply. That would be my best ambition, right? And you know make sure that my clients make a lot of money so that I can keep my job and pay for my condo. But that is very, you know, it helps. It helps. Yes. Thank you.
I have two questions, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm, of course.
My first is, having worked in creative and advertising, where personas and
Oh, yeah.
is just an inherent part of it, and I review a lot of inclusive marketing campaigns that I find problematic after the fact.
Of course.
How do you avoid tokenization while also retaining the importance of representation?
Yeah. So it's multi-tiered answer to that. First of all, you know, the honest answer is sometimes we don't. Sometimes we, you know, we tokenize when we shouldn't. So, you know, the second thing I think where there's an opportunity is through digital marketing and CRM, you know, relationship management, right? So if I look at one of our clients is the ACQ, like the LCBO. Actually, the LCBO has just become our client because of the work we do with ACQ. And the ACQ went on, ACQ is just like LCBO. And so basically they went on a listening tour and they talked to all of, you know, in different neighborhoods and different cities to see how people actually, what are their habits, right? Now they're asking questions, for instance, like, you know, I was in a meeting and the question wasn't even about tokenization, it was rice-based alcohol. Should we call it rice-based alcohol, or should we go Vietnam, Japan, China, and have the specific things? So that's interesting because now we're talking about inclusion from a logistical and consumer experience point, and that's the real work. That's the work that's great because now it's not about the model. We'll get to that part when it's time to do the ad. It's about the service, right? And CRM and digital and targeting, you know, individuals because through their lifestyle helps us do that a lot more. A little bit more difficult now that the cookies are dead, That's a technical term for advertising people. I'm not talking about physical cookies, because that would be the saddest thing. The cookies are dead. No more cookies. But that's one way. And then the other, the 6R thing that I was, framework is a great way to say, okay. The problem sometimes is that we get the 6R thing, framework, and then we just want to put like a trans woman because what the hell? It's just, they buy burgers too. But then we started thinking, oh my God, but we're not doing the thing for the community and we haven't put it in. So sometimes it even stops us from being inclusive, which is the risk and the pitfall of inclusion work often is we won't do anything at all unless it's absolutely perfect. I don't agree with that. I think do and improve and do and improve and do and improve until you get it right, right? And often the amounts of times I heard clients say, we are not ready. I've been hearing that now for the past 10, 15 years. We are not ready for trans people. Like as if they were going to blow up if, somebody sees a trans person in an ad. I'm pretty sure they won't. My answer to that, by the way, is have you seen Avatar? Because they're blue. And, very tall. They're radically different, and yet you understand what's happening to them. So, people can actually understand quite a bit. And I think often as marketers or, people behind organizations, we forget that.
Yeah, that really resonates because I find in the efforts of us trying to have representation, we
Yeah.
worry about people putting out, oh, you're not doing this. And
Yeah.
it can come off as performative. So,
That's it.
yeah,
I think if you have a plan also and you say, part of the plan is to make sure that our products or whatever, or the way we communicate reflects the market. And in the market, these are the groups. Okay. And then we'll do this, and then we'll do that, and then. But there are different targets that you can actually set up, and it's not all or nothing. Yeah. If not, you get nothing. It's an evolution for sure. I'm sure you see this in your everyday because who here actually you work on inclusion? Are you too? Yeah, so you must get a lot of that. Yeah, people want perfection, but and it's something people feel very. I think people in power feel very vulnerable about because it highlights all the stuff they've done wrong, and people have a hard time with that, obviously, right? Any other comment or question? No. Okay. Thank you. Yay.
So Chris, you showed us how she finally negotiated her gender, how she overcame fear, how she was saved by inclusive culture at work, thriving in a safe place at work. You are a woman, that's all I see. A posture of the heart, the 6 R's of inclusive work. So thank you so much for sharing your story today with us. And we have a little something for you from Quebec City. But thank you everyone for coming today, and you're welcome. Yeah. And we hope this was very informative for you, and if you would like any more information from us at Quebec City, please stay after. And the little bags are for you, and my business card is there, and again, I'm in the GTA. Thank you so much again for your attention.
Sorry, last little logistical announcement. Again, thank you very much to Chris. Thank you very much for Quebec City for bringing this, wow, super inspirational story. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chris, for being great story. It's amazing. So for those who are attending the Cocktails of Connection, the folks, our chief event officers are reminding me you have to go register to attend events, and it's actually pretty critical because by registering you get your tickets for drinks, which is pretty critical. Also being told by our folks that the bar will open at 5. So meanwhile, there's still half an hour if you want to mingle a little bit, stay in a room. I think there's coffee, I think there's water, stuff like that. So that, if you haven't purchased a ticket for this wonderful event at Cocktails Connection 5, you can actually buy one at the registration too. So you can join us for there. So again, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. Thank you again to Chris and the Quebec City Business Development team, and have a great afternoon. Hope to see you at 5 o'clock at the Cocktails Connection.